Thank you for inviting us to this, first of all, and thank you for sharing all those reflections. One thing I noticed that there's a ton of expertise out there, and this is such a huge issue with so many things to be expert on, and I'm not by any means expert on all of these or even really any of these aspects, but we've learned a lot as we've tried to take on this issue at the organization, and I'll just give you a little bit of background why we think it's an important issue, how it links to other big issues, as people said, global issues, and what we're doing about it. I'll try not to go too long. So just by way of background for folks, it also sounds like most folks are very acquainted with the Mystic River watershed, but for those who aren't, Mystic River is one of the three great rivers that flows into Boston Harbor directly, including the Charles to the south, but the Mystic River to the north flows from the north west and into Boston Harbor. The Mystic River Watershed Association is a nonprofit started in 1972, kind of not coincidentally I think the year of the Clean Water Act. We're about to celebrate our 50th anniversary. And our mission is to protect and restore the river, other water bodies in the watershed, and the lands that contribute to it. We have a number of programs, including water quality, which is sort of my bailiwick. And I also do a little work in restoration, but we have an education program, a greenways program about parks and green spaces, climate resilience, and ongoing stewardship and volunteer engagement. So if you know, so in 2020, we launched an initiative. As I said, most of my work is on water quality, where one short way of thinking about that is that we look for pollutants, things that are polluting the water. And usually the things we're looking for are invisible. It's, bacteria or phosphorus, things that are hard to see. Trash is quite a visible pollutant, and one that many people are concerned about, and for good reason. And so last year we launched an initiative to reduce the amount of trash that gets to the Mystic River, and that turns out to be a complicated problem. But if there are two big framing kind of slogans that we have, or kind of summaries of why we're in this business, that most trash in the ocean comes from rivers. And I say that because I think plastic in the ocean, as we'll see a little bit, is, I think, one of the biggest framing issues here, and one of the main reasons to get rid of our addiction to plastic. And, of course, this makes sense when you think about it, but things that end up in the ocean come from rivers. The land is across all continents is contributing water constantly to the ocean through rivers. And most of the trash in rivers comes off the land, and it can, in an urban area like ours, I'll show you a slide later, it can come from areas quite distant from the river itself. So anyway, those are our two kind of motivating slogans. And as I say, plastic in the oceans is a huge and growing and significant ecological issue, and eventually, as we'll see, a human health issue as well. It directly affects organisms by ingesting it. The picture in the upper left is from this series of kind of heartbreaking pictures of albatross breeding on islands in the Pacific, where parents have brought food items, they thought, back to their young, and the young die on the shore. This was an unmanipulated photo of a bird that whose belly was filled with plastic. There's obviously, it can physically entangle organisms, but it can also disrupt the internal kind of physiology of organisms, as we'll see as well. And again, as someone, I think John said, most plastic in the oceans comes from rivers, which is worth keeping in mind. So this is just a slide, not terribly readable for folks quickly, but it's just a kind of infographic on how plastic affects aquatic food webs. There are some direct effects. If an organism eats plastic, the plastic itself can physically obstruct their digestive tract, for instance. You know, whales are routinely found with, you know, kind of outrageous amounts of plastic in their bellies, whales that have died. But it also has these more almost subtle effects, but indirect effects, because as the plastic in the environment breaks down, it breaks down into very, very small particles, either by, you know, sunlight degradation or physical abrasion. And those plastic has this, often has this ability to attract organic pollutants. So things like DDT, which still exists in dilute amounts in the ocean, is preferentially picked up. It literally sticks to the surface of plastic. These big organic molecules, which are poisonous, toxic to animals and to people, literally sticks to this tiny bit of plastic that's floating in the water column, if you imagine. And as that piece of plastic, which isn't degrading in the short term, keeps floating, it keeps attracting more pollutants. And when that particle is ingested by a fish, that toxic pollutant can get mobilized in their system. So, you know, we did a fish analysis of fish tissue in the lower Mystic in the saltwater section, and found that eels migrating into Boston Harbor, into the lower part of the Mystic, had a very high level of DDT in their tissue. And they probably got it by eating bits of particulate matter through the water column on their way to Boston Harbor, which is just kind of a crazy thing to imagine. But it's an illustration of the way that plastic, because it doesn't degrade, it'll degrade into smaller particles, but those small particles themselves can then become vectors for concentrating toxins, and then those toxins accumulate up the food chain. So a small fish is eaten by a bigger fish, and is eaten not only by bigger fish, but by us. And so, you know, those toxins can end up on our plate. This is just another slide about the direct effects of plastic, negative effects of plastic. This is just one of many, many issues, but you know that bisphenol A and other versions of bisphenol are these, is a chemical used in plastic manufacture to give it various properties. It was used widely. I think this is not common now, but I mean, now in the last 5 years, to line cans, tin cans, to prevent corrosion. But those chemicals that are widely used in plastic are hormone mimics, hormone disruptors in not only human physiology, but in other animals as well. And so it's just another example of the material itself being potentially toxic. And I suspect we don't know all the potential effects, but it's also has the ability to attract other pollutants. So I'm just going to show you 2 graphs that really kind of took my breath away when I thought about them. This is one which is, so this is sort of asking what's the scale of the problem we're facing. And this is a graph of global primary plastics waste generation from 1950 at the left of this graph, okay, to 2015. And I was born in 1962, so I'm born here, and by far more than 90%, probably more than 95% of all plastic ever discarded. So this is one way of cutting the data, right? But presumably all the plastic that's ever been produced has, you know, 90% of it since I was born. But and I thought of, and that's, you know, I remember the world when I was a kid, and this is a different world. in terms of just the sheer amount of material that's been produced in the world. The number that really, though, took my breath away was when I thought, well, my kids were born in 1999, and more than half, so this is really kind of stunning, more than half of all plastic represented on this graph has been discarded, in this case, since my kids were born. And that's just a stunning fact to me. The other thing to notice about this graph is that, you know, that we talk about flattening the curve in COVID, you know, where you get a spike. This curve is not flattening. That trajectory is going up. There's more and more plastic being used. Half of all the plastic that's been discarded has been discarded since my kids were born. We're at the beginning. I like to say we're at the beginning of this environmental problem, not at the end, not near the end of it. And anyway, I think it's really a striking graphic. Here's another one, which comes from a paper that was sort of ambitiously titled "The Production and Fate of All Plastic Ever Made." And it kind of shows, so here's the primary production of plastic in, I think, millions of tons. I think that was the unit. It may not be recorded here. So this was like 8 billion tons of plastic ever produced. And then this shows the fate of it as you move from left to right. It shows what's happened to that plastic based on, you know, this is a study that kind of looked at other studies and tried to make this big, ambitious estimate. You know, a third of it is still in use. That is, we're using the things that are made out of plastic. It turns out to be this incredibly useful material, right? Like we build things out of it. And a third of it is still in use in phones and whatever, automobiles, houses. So much of our daily lives is surrounded by plastic. But more than half has been discarded or incinerated, rather more than half. And the interesting thing to tie to people's discussion about recycling is look at the percentage that's been recycled. So 500 out of 8,300 is, so this is all the plastic that's ever been recycled, amounts to less than 10% for sure of all plastic ever made. And then, so then, or the 600 actually, you get this 100 reaches the stream. So 600 out of 8,300, that's all the plastic ever made. But then this is the big thing that someone educated or told me about, and I'd never thought of it this way. You have to ask, it's okay to recycle plastic, but then what? It turns into another plastic product, right? And so what happens to that second plastic product? So this is the 600 that's been recycled. Of that, the vast majority of that is either discarded in its next use or incinerated. You're just delaying, you're just reducing by one use cycle, the discarding of that material. It's not magically solving the problem, it's just delaying it a little bit. Some of it gets reused and recycled again a second time, but the bulk of this 600 becomes waste after one recycling cycle. And that should frame our discussions about recycling, I think. I think this is a really powerful graph. Anyway, so that's the scale of the problem we're facing. And why are we interested? We talk about rivers. Why are we interested? Well, it turns out what trash gets to waterways, constituents care about it. Plastic gets to rivers. And if there's one slogan we have here, it's the stormwater pipes carry trash to rivers. So, you know, when it rains, water hits asphalt, goes down a storm drain, and then to the nearest water body. And it carries trash that's on the street. And that street can be many miles, it can be many, many blocks away. It gets in the pipe network and is transported very quickly to the stream. This is not the Mystic, this is from Australia, I think, but they simply put nets out at where the stormwater comes out on the river and caught what comes out and sure enough, you catch a ton of trash because that's where the trash in the river is coming from. We have a couple of projects this year even. And I was talking to the town engineer in Arlington who wants to pilot something like this in Arlington as well, actually. But on the biggest scale, we're going to put out a trash boom on the Malden River in Malden to catch the trash that's coming off the top of the Malden River. It's a really interesting place to put one because of the way the land drains to that area. And we're hoping that this will be an interesting experiment. It's not a solution, right? This is almost like a public education effort to say, I mean, it will trap trash from going down into the Malden, but it's an incomplete solution but first of all, and secondly, the main reason to do it is to kind of draw attention to this issue in general, because I think our organization's take on this is that, you know, although we do cleanups and we love hosting cleanups because I think it gets people engaged and it allows people to do something significant, we think the changes have to come at another level, at either a policy level or big cultural change level, where we stop using plastic so ubiquitously, just as people were saying. You know, I was thinking that we couldn't do this COVID vaccination rollout at this scale without plastic. Plastic is kind of an amazing thing, and it can be made sterile. It can be used to do good, and it needn't be wrapping our food, as so many people said. So I think the emphasis in the next round of work that we do is going to be on policy and kind of cultural changes around plastic in the watershed. So, and this is a graphic that just talks about 4 different, you know, strategies for reducing single-use plastic. And so I will stop talking, and thank you. And I do welcome any questions, certainly here, but offline as well. That is my email address, andy@mysticriver.org. Thank you very much.
Andy, that was fabulous. And in the interest of time, I think we're going to have Karen introduce Plastover, and then maybe, you know, because I know we're getting close to our time, so Karen can talk about Plastover, and then we can have questions and answer about Plastover, other ideas. You know, I heard some ideas in the introductions that we'd like to add as ideas for folks to be involved in Plastover. But if that makes sense, if we have Karen, and then we can do questions and ideas at the end. And I do know there was one question in the chat for you, Andy, so you could check at that too. So Karen, do you want to introduce Plastover?
Sure. Actually, on January 31st, I attended a webinar sponsored by the Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest. The session that intrigued me was titled Plastover, an Exodus from Plastic Waste. I have to give credit to the presenters. Writer Jonathan Bynes, social change consultant, Jerry Tolkien, and Plastic Pollution Coalition CEO and co-founder Diane Cohen. Jesse Tolkien was a social change consultant. So their conversations urged us to leverage Passover's power of symbology and transformation to use plastic to spark a sustained climate intervention. And Shelley's going to put a link in the chat to a recording of that conversation that you may find interesting. I don't want to go into it today. Every Passover, Jews around the world give up leavened bread, chametz. It's a sacrifice we make willingly to recall our ancestors' journey from slavery to freedom. But we're bringing an idea to you and asking you to promote it to others. What if we could make another kind of sacrifice? one that would have an immediate impact on the world. An exodus of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The core of this Plastover project is to encourage people to mindfully free themselves from the plague of plastic waste, committing to eliminate the use of single-use plastic for the duration of the Passover holiday, not to throw away all the plastic you have, but to not add further to the plastic plague. To choose what you'd like to do leading up to and through Passover this year, and let us know what you're doing to reflect your involvement in Plastover. Spread the word and ask others to participate. You can be an advocate or participant for change in the following areas to think about: schools, towns, events, eateries, and of course in your home. Or you can create a work of art from the plastic you collect from the environment and display it to advertise Plastover on social media or other places. There is a list of ways to participate and ways to learn more about the current plague of plastic when you sign up on the Myra Plastover website page, which Shelley can add to the chat. There is an event that's occurring concerning artwork that you might make, an art project in Arlington that's going to be a webinar that might give you some ideas. Shelley, do you have that to put in the chat also? So we want you to join us on the journey to a more sane, responsible use of plastic by committing to let my plastic go. There are so many ideas. For me, I've been thinking about placing a bottle cap on my Passover plate to help represent the plastic plague. Maybe if I'm feeling even more creative, I could make up a song with using "Let My Plastic Go" to sing during the Seder. I have also been in discussion with Temple Shir Tikva, the temple to which I belong, about other things that we can do. And already our office manager has instituted limited use of plastic at our temple. So this may give you some ideas about what to do, what you want to commit yourself to doing. I would like to see more people get involved. So we've presented the ideas on the sign-up page, but we'd like to have a discussion for the next few minutes. We know we've gone overtime already, but we'd like to know what you might commit to or actions to suggest to others. Last time we had for reverse Tashlich, we had 4 temples involved and about 63 people involved in collecting trash from the watershed, the sins from other people. We collected the sins instead of throwing a depiction symbolically, throwing our sins into the water. So this time we would like to get a baseline for involvement in this Plastover project this year, and we can report the results in temple newsletters and on the Myra webpage, and we'll be following up with email to you. So does anybody want to ask questions or make comments to continue this conversation if you like. And you have signed up for the Zoom, but keep in mind that you have not necessarily signed up committing to being involved in our Plastover project. So let's see, do you want to do raised hands, just regular raised hands? Anne, you want to unmute yourself? And
I think this sounds great. I think it starts small, but I'll be happy to publicize and see if I can get the small group with whom I'm Zooming Passover with involved.
that sounds great. Anybody else see, did you do you want to screen share the list, Shelley?
Yeah, sure thing. And I think Emma has a question.
Emma?
Hi, yeah, so thank you,
comment.
Karen and Andy, for really wonderful presentations. I think one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot has to do with something that Andy said about, capturing the trash at the end of the storm drain and, picking it up for reverse touchless, and all these things that are really important are really kind of trying to catch all the feathers once you splash the pillow. And one of the things that I've been trying to think a lot about is how do we incorporate activities that really get to the systemic root of the problem and encourage people like, okay, cool, I can stop using reusable water bottles, but I have like 8,000, I can stop using single-use water bottles. I have 8,000 reusable water bottles that every time I go to an environmental event, somebody gives me. Is that really solving the problem? And so, doing things like talking to whatever organizations you have, some power over, and seeing if you can invest in reusable plates, silverware, et cetera, to reduce single-use plastic at your events once we can do events that aren't on Zoom, hopefully soon, fingers crossed. But, thinking about ways that we can really work towards communal and systemic change, things like bag bans and things, if you live in a city that don't have one, talking to restaurants, talking to places that you have power and some voice to make change beyond just your own actions.
Definitely.
I love those, and we will definitely add them to the list. And I love the bag bans. I think it was Paul who had mentioned that as well. So I want to add that to the list, look at your cities and towns and do bag bans, and the same, any organization, whether it's a temple, a church, a not-for-profit, a for-profit, wherever. Yeah, the medical waste from single-use PPE. Yes. Yeah. Any other ideas folks have, or that you'd like us to get out there to put on this list, so we have it on the website so that we can kind of share to inspire other people to do this.
Niana?
Yeah, I will definitely bring back to my temple a goal to use less plastic. And our temple is signed up with Mass Energize. So we are looking for all kinds of things that we can do to reduce our use of fossil fuels and reduce pollution. So I'll definitely bring it back to my temple. And I like what Deborah said about declare the plastic tray. I think we really need something very, very big, because little pieces it's already in little pieces. So I don't know how to somehow make it concrete for people to see how much there is, and find a way for them to make a bigger commitment. I know we have to start small, but it really has to be a big effort together. So I'll start with my temple, and for myself, I'm going to try to make my own dishwashing soap, so I don't, and my own cleaning products, so I don't have to buy the plastic bottles. Okay, so thanks.
Love it. I'm going to add some of those too.
I heard that detergent can come in strips, so that they're not in a plastic bottle. I never knew that.
We also get shampoo bars and that, but and they come just in like a little paper thing. And then also you can get conditioner now. I didn't think they could do conditioning, but they can.
Jury's still out on how effective that conditioner is for curly, dry hair. I want your recommendations.
Well, and I thought it was interesting. I think, Deborah, you had said, you know, it's hard to decide how much to sacrifice. And I think that's what's somewhat neat about Karen's idea with Plastover is the idea of maybe just start for Passover, you know, because I think sometimes we think I can't live without this, but you're like, okay, for this, you know, for this period of time, I am going to live without it. And then it's like, well, wait a minute, did I really need that? You know, one thing that I thought that was so important. Not saying condition.
Another thing that plastic is like overlooked a lot too is in clothes. Like I saw this thing about this, it was like a pair of pants that like disintegrated and you could see they still looked like pants. It was all the plastic that was left, the cotton and the other materials were gone, but it still looked like a regular pair of pants with like the, you know, plastic in it. So like we basically won't buy any new clothes. Like we only shop at like the Goodwill now. My kids are into it too, but you know, stuff like stuff like that. It's hidden everywhere too.
Well, I read recently that if you have clothes that are synthetic, that when you wash them, some of those particles go into the water. And so, you know, there are so many ways that you can commit to by writing, calling restaurants and saying, you know, I will not go to your restaurant anymore if your take-home containers are all plastic, you know. Writing letters to companies, that's a way to start, like Emma was talking about, get at the source. Write letters to the editor of your newspaper to spread the word to other people in your community. These are all ideas to start the effort. And, you know, I belong to one temple in the watershed, but there are many other temples in the watershed. So if you know somebody else who is associated with another temple, Temple Isaiah, Temple Emmanuel, Temple Amuna, I mean, there are temples in Cambridge. North Cambridge is part of the Mystic River watershed. So there are lots of, anybody else have some ideas about things? Paul?
Yeah, I think what you said is very important, Karen, to reach out to other organizations as well. You know, as Andy presented the facts about what's going on with plastic, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed and helpless because of the magnitude of what's going on. But to understand that not only are we working individually in our own homes during the Seder or in our own communities, but there are environmental groups like the Mystic River Watershed, like Greenpeace, like Conservation Law Foundation. There are many, many, many that are pulling in the same direction in terms of addressing this issue. They also, aside from on an individual level and on the town level, there's a lot of legislation now pending in the State House regarding plastic bans. And if you want to contact your local state representative and find out where she or he stands with the particular legislation, or whether she or he is co-sponsoring some of that legislation, that would be another way of addressing it. The important point I'm trying to make is don't feel you're dealing with this in isolation. Even though everything you do may seem insignificant, it's very important to do it. That's not a quote from me, that's what Gandhi said. What's important is to look at it not just from an individual point of view, but to realize that there are a lot of people on many very different levels of intervention that are working on this issue, so you don't feel alone in this process.
And Paul, that I loved your suggestion of just calling your local representative. It just was shared, a story was shared, and often you feel like, well, you shouldn't get on until there's a bill introduced or and they're actually saying it's more impactful if you personally call your legislator without, not related to a bill, but related about a specific issue. That they are more likely to remember that and act on that than if they feel like it's a call that's just being made because an organization put out a call to say, call Charlie Baker on the climate bill. Not saying that that's not effective, but somehow you just calling and saying, listen, I live in your district. I'm concerned about plastic. What are you doing about plastic? It's really impactful. Yeah.
You can also, though, find out what the legislation that is now pending is, because there are a number of bills. It's really becoming a groundswell of support within the State House. And so to educate ourselves to actually what is going on, I think is another piece of it. Yes, I think it's important to just express your feelings about plastic and about environmental issues in general. And if you can address particular pieces of legislation and ask the state representative what their position is about it, I think that also would be helpful and meaningful.
Right. But that is what actually impacts them more, which I thought was fascinating. I was like, they were doing studies on climate. It was related to climate and how to impact climate. And it really is those personal stories of saying, I walk down by the river, it's filled with water. I see this. There's got to be bills. You've got to do something about it.
So Niana asked,
Oh, the bat mitzvah without
is it possible to have a bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah without plastic? So, when you have items brought to the temple or brought to your home, if you say, I want them not to be in plastic containers or plastic covers, the businesses that use plastic need to research another alternative for all the plastic that they provide through their service.
My dream would be that the temples would make a rule that you could not have you had to have a plastic-free affairs. So if it was weddings and bar mitzvahs, they should be plastic-free. And then people, I think, would take, if it's a real mandate, I think people would take it a lot more seriously.
We do not use plastic utensils at our temple anymore.
Good.
We're using regular silverware or, regular utensils. So did anybody have any additional comments? Shelley, you didn't really share the screen with the list. I didn't see anything on my screen.
I can.
But you can see the list of items for sign up. So
I will be adding to this list based on all the great stuff, which was one of the reasons why we wanted to have this discussion. So a lot of really good stuff came up. So I will add to this list that is on our website with some of these great ideas that everybody had. And then I will follow up. I'll send an email to folks just with the link to the website that shows where you can sign up. And it's a great thing to forward on to your friends and family. So saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. So all that will be followed up. And I would encourage
what
if
website are you referring to?
Pardon?
What website?
It's mysticriver.org/Plastover.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So yep, if you can go to it right now, but I'll add your ideas. I would say, if you have more ideas, keep them coming. I will just keep adding them to the
well,
website.
we don't want to overwhelm people with choices.
Exactly.
So there's going to be so many people, so many steel, ST. There, that's spelled differently.
Oh,
Stainless steel. EE.
There we go.
So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I really am so excited about this. If you know other people in temples who belong to other temples other than Shir Tikva, we'd love to have other temples involved, and they can see this Zoom webinar to understand what our purpose is and get more people to sign up. You know, hopefully we'll have more than 63 and this will become an annual event. As long as there's plastic, we'll have it. So thank you, and I guess we're going to sign off then.